Hello and welcome to another video. Now, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you'll know that these videos are normally on a technical topic, such as a review or how-to or something like that. But this time, I'm going to do something slightly different. In this episode, I'm going to cover a topic which will affect every citizen of the United Kingdom, and that is Brexit. For those of you who don't know, on the 23rd of June 2016, the nation voted in a referendum, and the result was that just over half of those who voted for the UK to leave the European Union. But I'm not going to cover that here. What I'm going to do is cover something that happened way back in time when I was 1 year old, in fact. You see, if you ask anyone in the United Kingdom who actually has any idea about when our glorious country actually joined the European Economic Community, as the EU was then called, they'll probably say something like, oh, well, we had a 1975 referendum and we joined after that. And they would be precisely 100% wrong. Because what actually happened was, we actually joined as a country, the EU, or the EEC as it was, back on the 1st of January 1973, a good 2 years before the referendum. And we joined with Denmark and Ireland. So the referendum that we had in 2016 was in fact the second referendum that the UK had to leave the EU. So now you're sitting there and saying, John, cut all of this waffle. What are you actually trying to do in this video? And I'll show you. Back before the referendum in 1975, every home in the UK got 3 leaflets. These are the leaflets here, the actual leaflets, borrowed from my parents. This one even has genuine 1970s paint stain on the front cover. These leaflets contained information from the various parties who had a vested interest in leaving or staying in the EU. There was one here from the government of the time, and that was a Labour government. And here has a quote from the then Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. This one is from an organisation called the National Referendum Campaign, and they were voting no. And the other one was from the Britain in Europe campaign, and they were voting yes. And for the rest of the video, I'm going to take a brief look inside each of these leaflets to cover the sort of things and how each side saw leaving, or the drawbacks and the benefits of the EEC membership. So if that sort of thing interests you, please stay on. Otherwise, you may as well switch off now, and another technical topic video will be coming along in the next couple of months. Okay, and now we come on to looking a little bit more in depth at the individual leaflets. And I have to say, I genuinely think if they did all this, if they sent all of the leaflets back through people's letterboxes for the 2016 referendum, there would have definitely been, I'm pretty confident, a different outcome, because a lot of the complaints were that they didn't know what they were voting for. They didn't know the ins and outs, the whys and wherefores, and I think a lot of the various lobbying groups did think that the internet would take a lot of that away. They wouldn't have to do all this. But I think if you have this information in this type of simple form through letterbox, it's still very powerful, and it can still sway people one way or the other. Anyway, so this is the first leaflet we're going to have a little in-depth look at, and this is the leaflet that we were given from the government. So the government obviously wanted us to stay in the EC. They'd come through like a year and a half of negotiations since we came in 1973 to get a better deal, so they could go and take it back to the population as a referendum. And this was the referendum that they were going back with that new deal. So obviously they wanted us to very much stay. But the leaflet actually does give us some reasons not to as well. So it's kind of balanced. It's much more balanced than the 2016 referendum was. But yeah, so we'll start with this. So if we go into here, we have a sort of a plea from Harold Wilson, the then Prime Minister. This is like a little paragraph about what what you're actually going to be voting for and how you will vote. So it tells you a bit about the polling station and everything like that. But interestingly, for anything that I'm going to do in depth here, I'll try and do a little a blow up of the text. The text is all available elsewhere, and I'll link to that in the description. But for different parts of it that I'm particularly going in depth on, I'll try to do a blow up in the video. So here's something. The first part of real information. The first is just sort of like introduction. The first part of real information basically tells us who we're in Europe with, and it says we're in with 9 other countries. Obviously now we're one of 28 countries. There's 27 other countries other than this, but at the time there was just 9, including us. And it gives you some goals to bring people together in Europe, to raise living standards and improve working conditions. I couldn't really say if this has actually happened, because we've been in so long. You can't really tell if the working standards would have been raised anyway by our government. But as Britain was pretty much a basket case in the financial basket case in the 1970s, it's fair to say that anything positive would have probably done this. It's probably better to evaluate this by looking at a country that's only recently joined about 10 years ago and see if there's an improvement there. The other ones are promoting and growth and boosting world trade and to help the poor regions in Europe. Well, I think that's definitely happened. So Czech Republic is now coming on quite well, and Lithuania, Latvia, since they broke up from the USSR, they're definitely becoming more economically powerful. Estonia as well. Obviously, Estonia's went really big on the digital front, and they're really powerful in terms of tech companies. And obviously, to help maintain peace and freedom. Well, none of the EU countries have been at war with any of the other EU countries since we all joined the EU. So that's true. Whether it would have been like that anyway, it's difficult to say, but it's certainly true. Then we have some a map of the world and where our trading links are, and these are European Community EEC trading links. And it's not until you see something like this that you realise how many countries we're going to have to renegotiate with when the UK leaves the EU. That's just the special trade links are the red ones. There'll be other ones as well that are not on here. So we've only got a year, maybe 2 years with the extension. It's very difficult to see how we're going to renegotiate all of this. But that's what there was in this leaflet. And then the real deal, the real bit of information, which is what was renegotiated and effectively what swung the 1975 referendum to lead us stay in. They negotiated on 2 main points. They renegotiated the membership on 2 main points. That was food, to give us fair food prices in UK shops, to make changes to the Common Agricultural Policy, and to keep our prices lower than the rest of the world. Now, again, it's very difficult to say. I mean, we are certainly not an inexpensive nation to live, but then we're not in the realms of Sweden and Norway. So it's interesting. It's interesting. The other point was the money and jobs. They renegotiated how much we pay into the EU. And obviously there was another one where Margaret Thatcher, later on in the 80s, she renegotiated and got another rebate back. So we actually had 2 rebates back. So we're actually paying in way less than other countries were at the time, and are now, I think, for the per head of population. One of the other points was that the renegotiation would mean that we wouldn't have to have a fixed exchange rates. They were very worried about that, and we're not in the European monetary regulation anyway. So that is true. That's still true now. And they won't, specifically, we won't have to put VAT on food. Well, we don't have VAT on food, so that's also true. So far, the only one that I can see that isn't factual is that you can't say, well, it's definite one way or the other, is how the Common Agricultural Policy has affected food in the UK. We have a very good supply of food, but it's a moot point whether it would be cheaper or more expensive if we weren't in the EEC. So it's all factual, really, the majority of this. Then we come into some other persuasive techniques. There must have been lots of talk at the time about other Commonwealth countries wanting us to leave the EU or the EEC. And so there's some quotes from leaders of Australia, New Zealand, and the Jamaican ambassador to the UN saying that we really should stay. And then there's a whole section on and this seems to be a big thing even now. It's like, oh, well, we're bringing back, so we make our own laws, and we're not dictated to by Parliament, by the EU Parliament. So it does actually say a lot of facts here, and it does and these are still, majority of these hold true now. Some of the facts are that we obviously we don't want to be dictated to by Europe, but we are still quite a small nation when you look into the terms of America and Russia, as it says here, but also China now and India. So we kind of need to be part of something, is what it's saying here. We need, we're part of UN, we're part of NATO, we're part of the International Monetary Fund. We need to be part of groups to maintain our standing in the world. And the other things it mentions are things like Britain still has a final say in law. So that was one of the points at the time was we're going to be dictated to, and laws will be passed on our behalf, and we won't have any say. Well, that's still doesn't happen. Everything has to be ratified in our UK courts, in UK Parliament. But the one thing that I want to bring attention to is fact number 3. And at the moment, there is a lot of conjecture in both parties about how we will leave. But when I say both parties, I mean the Leave and the Remain parties. But it's interesting here that it actually states quite unequivocally that the British Parliament in Westminster retains the final right to repeal the Act which took us into market on the January 1st, 1973. Thus, our continued membership will depend on continuing assent of Parliament. In other words, that to come out, we need a Parliament to agree for us to come out. So the fact that we ultimately, that many people are saying that we can just leave as soon as this finishes, we leave. But no, there's definitely needs to be, according to this anyway, an Act of Parliament that took us in needs to be go through Parliament and be agreed by the House to leave as well. So that's interesting there, and then there's a brief précis of what happens what they think we would happen if we said no, and a one if we say yes, and then a sort of a sum up about time for us to decide. Your vote counts, use it. It's very important. So that's the first leaflet, and that's kind of trying to be persuasive but unbiased, which is a very difficult position to be in. And now we'll move on to the next one, which I believe is the yes leaflet. Okay, so we move on to the next leaflet, and that is for the yes vote, and that was published by Britain in Europe. Now, Britain in Europe were a consortium of political leaders and various political parties. So we had Obviously, the current government were supporting it because they'd spent a number of years renegotiating our deal. So they were for it, and as from the previous leaflet, you could see why they thought as a government. But the individual members of the government, such as Harold Wilson, Dennis Healey, James Callaghan, Roy Jenkins, they were all for this, as were the majority of the Conservative government at the time, including Margaret Thatcher. She was for it. And the Liberal Party, the Social Democratic Party, they were for it. The Labour Party were for it. And the Northern Irish parties, the Alliance Party and the Vanguard Unionist Progressive Party, they were all for staying in the EC. Now, it's interesting from that list of people, those list of organisations, that it's only really the Liberals and the Social Democrats, which are now the Liberal Democratic Party, are still in that list of people. So the Labour Party currently don't want us to stay in the EU, and neither do the majority of the Tory party. So it's only really the Liberal Democrats who have constantly wanted to stay in the EU. So you read into that what you will. But let's have a look into the leaflet. So first off, we have a small introduction like the other leaflet, and all of the three leaflets will have an introduction. It's just some prose to get you into that feeling of the yes vote. And then the first section is our friends want us to stay in. And this is just a list of countries from the Commonwealth and from elsewhere. So Australia are on there, Canada, New Zealand, US, and the other members of the European community. They all want us to stay in. Moving over the page, we've got some various little sort of questions and answers from the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Actually, I just noticed here that the Pierre Trudeau, I don't know whether Trudeau is a common name in Canada or in Quebec. It's obviously a French-Canadian name. But the current Prime Minister in Canada is Trudeau. And I wonder if he was in any way linked to that. Of course, Trudeau might be as common as Smith is in the UK. I don't know. Anyway, that's by the by. The section, why can't we go it alone? Well, this is interesting because basically they just say in here, paraphrasing this, but we don't have an empire anymore, so we can't depend on them, and we're on our own, essentially. That's that little section. Obviously, you can read all the words, because I have them all in a link in the description to where all these leaflets are that I've scanned in. Our traditions are safe. This is another one, and this is one that is being discussed at this referendum and the Brexit we currently have in 2017 and 2018. It's all about, all of our traditions will be smashed into smithereens, and basically they're saying here we'll still have the Queen, we'll still have our English common law. There'll be a couple of extra, we'll have some extra laws in terms of commerce, and but we won't have to eat foreign food, and we won't have to drive foreign cars. But amazingly, of course, we've chosen to eat foreign food and drink and drive, not drink and drive, but to drive foreign cars. So that whole section is a bit strange, and I've never understood that about the people who are against the EU, and they say, it's our heritage and stuff like that. It's like, well, if it was our heritage, you should have been buying Rover cars in the 1990s and they wouldn't have gone bust. There you go. Interesting. Moving on to the staying in protects our jobs section. It's the really interesting quote in this section is that it is very doubtful if we could negotiate a free trade agreement with the EC, and that was a paraphrasing, but that's what it says here. It is very doubtful if we could then negotiate a free trade agreement with the community. Even if we could, it would have damaging limitations, and we would have to accept many community rules without having the say we now have in their making. That is exactly what the situation we're in now. Again, nothing has changed. I mean, basically, the one thing I get about these leaflets is you could have delivered them to the doors of the British population in 2016, and not much would have changed. The fors and the against are pretty much identical. Basically, it also says that we would lose access to the EC market, which is the EU market now, and the 60 markets that who have a free trade agreements with the EC. Again, identical to the type of arguments that are going on now. And then finally, what we have here is securing food at fair prices. Again, paraphrasing this section, it basically says we can't feed ourselves, so we're going to be in a right old state if we can't be part of the EU and the common market. And this is again, people don't really, I don't think they understand or don't wish to understand or whatever, but the United Kingdom is a net food importer. We've been a net food importer since the late 1800s. So, this whole section is very important to us because we do have to buy the majority of our food from elsewhere across the world. And then this is interesting and quite funny, actually. The alternative choices. So, some people at the time obviously wanted us not in the European community, but they wanted us in alternative groups and collations of interested parties. They want us to become a communist Britain, or they want us. This is interesting. Some want us closer to the United States than to Europe, but America doesn't want that. No, of course they wouldn't. Why would they? Some want us to be half linked to Europe as part of the free trade area, but the European community. So this here, the European community itself doesn't want it. This half linked to Europe, I guess this would be like EFTA, and what Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein have, perhaps. So there's lots of things here, but it also says there are also differences among those who say stay, and some of us are Labour, some of us Conservative, some of us are Liberal, and some of us are non-party. That's interesting. But everybody here, and again on the back, it shows you these people, including people like the General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress and the President of the National Farmers Union. They wanted us to stay in at this time. So that's the yes leaflet. And as I said before, you can see all of these leaflets. If you click on the link in the description, I've scanned them all in, and now on to the final leaflet, which is for the no vote. Okay, now we come on to the final of the three leaflets, and this leaflet is from the no campaign, and the campaign was promoted by the National Referendum campaign. Now, I've done some research on the National Referendum campaign, and basically it's made up of, again, similar to the Yes campaign, some political parties, some small organisations, and some individuals who have put their name down specifically. And essentially, it's the left side of the 1975 Labour Party. So you've got people like Michael Foot, Tony Benn, and because of Tony Benn, there's obviously a Jeremy Corbyn link there, because Jeremy Corbyn was, although he wasn't an MP in 1975, he was part of on a council, and he had done work with Tony Benn. So Peter Shaw, Eric Valey, Barbara Castle, and on the right side, the extreme right side of the political spectrum, Enoch Powell was also a committed no member. There were 148 Labour MPs in total who opposed their government's for Yes campaign. There were also the Ulster Unionists, so the Ulster Unionist Party and the Democratic Unionist parties in Northern Ireland, and to be fair, they've stuck with their no policy. They're also promoting a no at the at the last referendum, and they're sticking with that they want to leave the EU. But the two parties on the bottom of the list were the SNP, Scottish National Party, and Plaid Cymru, which is the National Party of Wales, and they have switched because in the 2016 election and continually they promoted Wales or Scotland and Wales respectively being in EU. So that's interesting. When we move on to the leaflet, let's just open it up. So as with the original government leaflet and the Yes campaign leaflet, there's an introduction trying to promote the No campaign in a very patriotic, some may even say jingoistic, but I couldn't possibly say way. And then we come into the crux of the matter, the real information here. Now we start on this side with food. Now the perspective that they were taking is and the view documented here is that we did have, before we joined the EC, we had the cheapest food we could have the cheapest food from anywhere in the world. But now that we have to buy from the EU and the EU partners, costs are hideously expensive. And it postulates rising food prices. And it's interesting, actually. I'll tell you something about this leaflet and the previous Yes leaflet. Both really, really concentrate on food being a major issue in the Yes No campaign. And the reason why, I think you need to know what in 1975 was causing this. And the fact was, in 1975, inflation was at 24%. Like I said, the UK in the 1970s was a bit of a basket case financially, and at 24%, food was obviously on everybody's minds, provision of food for their families. So that's why this leaflet and the other leaflet concentrate on food. Just to give you an idea, in 2018, as I'm recording this, it's about 3% inflation. So food was a big, major part of this here. And so like I said, they're postulating rising food prices, and they're also saying that our food is destroyed or sold to Russia. Well, it's interesting because, yeah, we did, the EU definitely did have butter mountains and wine lakes, although that is considerably less now. So that's interesting. And then we move on to jobs, and this side is all to do with jobs and trading. It says here that jobs will drift to the continent. Now, it's true that jobs have drifted away from this country, but and it also states here that there is a threat to iron, steel, and oil. Well, these have kind of come true to a certain extent, although we do have European companies with their bases in the EU. Nissan Motor Manufacturing has their European base in the UK. But a lot of these problems didn't see at this point in 1975. There was, the breakup of the USSR was not on the horizon. China becoming such a behemoth in manufacturing and trade, not there. India growing as it did, not even in the area. Climate change. So you say oil. The reason why oil has gone down is because we don't have much North Sea oil anymore, but also because we're moving from petrochemical industry being in the heart of our energy production to renewables. So things like that, iron and steel. China again and other countries will make iron and steel cheaper than us. We still do have some production facilities here, but they're largely niche for specific areas. So yeah, this may have all come true, or lots of it may have come true, but it's probably not because we were in the EU. It's possibly because of other things. And I think both the Yes campaign and the No campaign do concentrate on things like that, where they say, oh, this is directly, because of the EU or the EEC as it was here. But they don't take in any other factors of world trade. So that's all interesting. And so if we move to the last page, actually there is one thing that I wanted to mention. It does say here that when they're trying to push the case of having food. We are having higher food prices than other countries. It does say here that in 1974, between 1971 and 1974, food prices rose in Britain and Ireland by over 40%, and we were in the EC. In Norway and Sweden, which stayed out, they rose only by 20%. But it's interesting to know that Sweden did latterly join the EC. So that's interesting. And then in the end, it does. This is interesting from the point of view of now, from the point of view of the discussions that are going on now after the second referendum vote in 2016. The government were, I don't know whether they still are, nobody really knows what the government are trying to do, but I think the government were at one point trying to push for a hard Brexit, which not be in any trade association, be completely out of the common market, and any trade market and any free trade area. They just wanted us to go completely alone. I think that's changed now. But while they were still on that tack, they actually completely and utterly said that we did not want to be part of EFTA. Whereas in the No campaign in 1975, they were absolutely saying that we should be part of EFTA. They were absolutely saying that we should remain members of the free trade area that now exists between the common market and the countries in EFTA, which are Norway, Sweden, Finland, Austria, Switzerland, Portugal, and Iceland. And of course, this has changed now. So EFTA now only has Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Sweden, Finland, Austria, Portugal are now all in the European Union. So this information is really interesting because we're in the same situation again, but many years on, and things have changed. So this is interesting. So that's the No campaign's leaflet. So we've been through all 3 leaflets now, and I think it's time for some summing up. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that little trip back through history of the UK referendum from 1975. And before I go, I'd like to sum up a few things that I've learned during this research project. The first thing is that I was surprised that the 1975 referendum was a referendum to actually leave the EEC. Like most people, obviously I was 3 then, so I've just picked up various information from parents and relations and people who were around voting age at that time. And I always assumed, like everybody else, I think, that it was a referendum to join. So I found that out, and that's quite interesting in itself. I think that the campaign in 2016 was very much more based on conjecture and half-truths and even lies, and also when you couple that with the issues, the potential issues with third-party organisations and countries influencing people's vote through social media, Facebook in particular, I think that puts a whole colouring on the 2016 referendum that simply wasn't there in the 1975 referendum. Based on the leaflets, the information around there was very much based on fact and less on conjecture. And I think that's if nothing else, that is how you split the two campaigns. One was very much based on fact, and one is very much based on lies and half-truths. So that's interesting. And finally, I say finally, it's the penultimate point that I want to make, is that the referendum seemed more better planned and more organised in 1975. Those leaflets that we've just reviewed, if they had been produced in 2016, then I'm pretty sure that the whole outcome would have been different. They seemed to have known that what was going to happen well in advance, and nobody was surprised by the planning, the leaflets, and everything like that. 2016 was much more rushed. It seemed that everybody assumed that the result was going to be that we would stay, and that's obviously turned out not to be the case. So there's another difference between the two referendums. And finally, the big changes in 1975 that those leaflets couldn't possibly have predicted. For instance, the breakup of the United Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, in the end of the 80s. That wasn't predicted. We were still in the middle of the Cold War. The rise of China and, to a lesser extent, India, as being a huge economic power and manufacturing industry. That was simply not on the radar. And finally, and the one thing that probably colours everything else is the internet. The internet was not even considered in 1975, and yet it was a game changer. It is an absolute game changer. People can communicate and do commerce transactions across the world. That is a huge difference to what we had in 1975. So all of those points show the differences, but the overarching points that they were made in 1975 and 2016 were very, very similar. I think they dealt with them in different ways, but the crux of the matter is it's still the same areas that we're considering. Okay, well, that's all for now. If you like what you've seen, please like and subscribe, because you know how YouTube works. And I'll be along in a few weeks' time with another video. Thanks for watching.